If you're a maintenance supervisor for a commercial property, you've had to deal with everything from leaky faucets to flickering light bulbs. But nothing's worse than that ancient boiler that's lived in the building since the day it was built, 50 years ago. It's enough to make anyone lose their cool. That's where Grainger comes in. With industrial-grade products and dependable fast delivery, Grainger can help with any challenge, from worn-out components to everyday necessities. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
His attention to detail is dog shit, okay? He wrote in his book that PS 611 was a small school within Youth House. He fucking was wrong. And he might have even lied, okay? PS 611 was in the Bronx. We're told Oswald was at Youth House on 12th Street in Manhattan, but yeah, we have this note from the time he's supposed to be at 12th Street in Manhattan at Youth House. He's actually at PS 611 in the Bronx. Now, are there other PS 611s considering there's multiple PS 44s? Of course. So, but when did the other PS 611 open? I'll show you. Right there. PS 611, the only other PS 611 was built in Queens, and it was 1958. All right? So Armstrong got it wrong. The whole fucking world got it wrong. Armstrong was in Oswald was in two places at once. Yet again. And all of this is ignored by Kennedy researchers because they're stupid. All right, here we go. More indications that the Oswald was not sent to Youth House. Well, one of the Oswald was sent to Youth House, and the other one was sent to Spofford. Now, digging into Spofford, let me explain what this is. So you have a place up in the Bronx called Spofford Youth House. We have an FBI report here that says when Oswald was taken from court, he was sent to the Spofford Youth House in the Bronx. Okay? This is in 1953, April 24th-ish, right? That week of April 20th to 24th. So I go digging into the Spofford Youth House, and the Bronx Youth House at 1221 Spofford. Guess what? There was one there, but it really wasn't called the Spofford Youth House until 1957 or 58. So I'm like, fuck, how the hell do we have a reference to a place that didn't exist yet? Well, then, as I keep digging, what do I find? I find there was a building there before that building was rebuilt in 57. It was actually started in 53, 54, and it was rebuilt and done in 57. But there was a small building on scene that could house about 100 children, and it was mostly a female school for troubled girls. But they had a couple boys there in a separate program there's virtually zero information on. And I'm goddamn convinced Oswald, one of the Oswalds, was sent there. This would correspond with Marguerite Oswald claiming that she had gone to pick up her son up at another youth house far north of Manhattan. What was that one called, though? There's another youth house that comes up in the story in Marguerite Oswald's book, but it turns out to be incorrect. But this makes perfect sense to me, even though the Spofford Youth House didn't exist in its current form. Well, actually, it became a real cesspool of fucking corruption and raping kids, and it was really a bad scene. It was shut down in the 80s or 90s, I think. But before that, this building that was there, it housed roughly 100 people, mostly girls. I'm 100% convinced Oswald was sent there, and there is where he was interviewed by, well, let's just say MK Ultra-ish type people or handlers of some sort. But this is another example of what we need records on. They have records on this, and what they did was they give us a piece here, a piece there, a piece here, a piece there, and they combine records just like John Armstrong said they did for two men, and that's what we have. We have compilations of information. We don't have original documents in their entirety, period. And we're never going to get them, ever. All right, so Spofford Youth House announced in 52, not built till 57. Like I said, there was that other building there before, which no one ever talks about. Seems like a CIA black site for kids. Here we go. Youth House at 1221 Spofford. That's way up here. But actual, the Youth House in Manhattan should have been like down here somewhere. According to Robert Oswald, Youth House was located on 12th, right? So we have that contradiction between being on Spofford in the Bronx or 12th in Manhattan. Robert Oswald's a fucking liar. Here we go. John Pick testified that Lee went to a public school in New York City, Manhattan, on about 80th or 90th Street between 3rd and 4th Avenue, right? That's the other school I'm talking about. This, to me, is the evidence that Lee Oswald, the real Oswald, went to school in Manhattan, while Harvey Oswald went to school up at Trinity and then PS 117. And then, allegedly he went to PS 44 in the Bronx, but when you read the statements of John Caro, it looks like he got registered there late, and then never actually attended. Then look at the right-hand side here. This is from Robert Oswald's book. It says, during the summer, mother looked around for another apartment so Lee could make a fresh start in a new school in the fall. On September 14th, 1953, 10 days before his parole was to end, Lee entered the 8th grade at PS 44 on Columbus Avenue at 76th Street. That's PS 44 Manhattan. The PS 44 I've been talking about is the PS 44 in the Bronx. But according to John Caro, Oswald never actually showed up there once. It was registered in January, allegedly went once or twice in March, but I don't have information. I don't buy that at all because he contradicts. The record says he went there, but John Caro's statement says he didn't. And I'm more likely to believe that he didn't. And so to me, this is the clearest indication that what we're told about Oswald's school records in New York is total bullshit, and that Harvey Oswald was up in the Bronx, Lee Oswald stayed down in Manhattan, and that they melded these two men's records together. There's no other explanation. This is more information on Youth House, history of Youth House, all that stuff. I go kind of off the deep end when it comes to background information because you have to. Okay. This report here says Oswald entered PS 44 in New York City, not Bronx. New York City is a distinction on May 7th, 53, at which time he entered the 9th grade, but that's impossible because he should have only been in the 8th grade. And when he goes to Beauregard down in New Orleans, he enters the 8th grade, not the 9th grade. All right. So this is incorrect. Actually, the date is actually 1/7. I was off by 3 days. Oswald and his mother were in New York until January 7th of 54. That is a confirmable fact. All right, so I'm not going to go over the details of this timeline, but for historians out there who actually want to understand anything about any sequence of events, if you don't do timelines like this, you're shooting yourself in the dick, okay? This is Oswald's New York timeline. The attendance officers were Keating and Brennan of the 24th District, case 23979, Victor J. Connell of the 22nd District, New York City Probation Officer John Caro, social worker Evelyn Strickman and William Grote. I didn't mention those names, but they become important in the story. Magistrates were Delaney, Fogarty, Tshirt, and there's a fourth one. I have it somewhere. I just forgot to add it here because, well, I just forgot to add it here. Then the schools that are mentioned are Trinity Lutheran, PS 117, 44 Bronx, 47 School for the Deaf, 611, 44 Manhattan, right? So plus there's another missing school that we don't know about, right? Now, this is a real chronology. Boom. Everything August 42, every fucking thing they did, what they ate for breakfast, you name it. It goes, I have every single thing here. And this is what happens. When you will lay out a proper chronology, the parts that are wrong jump out at you like that. They will basically jump off the page and show you, hey, look right here. This is where it's fucked up. So unfortunately, all I found was that one indicator here of April 10th. That's the only anomaly there. No anomalies here really because they did a good job of hiding the obfuscations of the dual records. All right. This is where the next anomaly lies, and everything after it in New York is drawn into question based on the story. Okay. So God, the keeps going. God, it keeps going. See, that's a real chronology. You need to see that's 6 pages of 2-year period in New York, right? That's everybody, these notes are for sale. You can go buy them right now, buy me a coffee and follow along if you want. But Oswald most certainly lived in North Dakota. And we have this from numerous reasons. First off, he admitted to Eileen Mosby in Russia that he lived in North Dakota, which also indicates it was most certainly Harvey Oswald in Russia because it was Harvey Oswald who was in North Dakota. So he says, I became interested about the age of 13, and they're talking about communism. An old lady handed me a pamphlet about saving the Rosenbergs. I still remember that pamphlet about the Rosenbergs. I don't know why. Then we moved to North Dakota, and I discovered a book in the library, Das Kapital, right? So he tells Eileen Mosby that after New York, he went to North Dakota. All right? Plain and simple. Harvey Oswald went to North Dakota, while Lee Oswald remained in New York at PS 44 in Manhattan. The FBI acknowledged that Eileen Mosby turned over 7 to 8 typed pages of notes from her meeting with Oswald that had become the UPI article, which was published nationwide. This copy is what the FBI says Mosby turned over to them, and they clearly tampered with it. And why is that? Because in the article, it says here, then we moved to North Dakota, and I discovered one book in the library, Das Kapital. But according to the notes that Mosby gave the FBI, which they clearly altered, it says, then we moved to New Orleans, and I discovered a book in our library, Das Kapital. All right, so the FBI, again, tampering with documents when we have the fucking outright evidence that he was in goddamn North Dakota, all right? Very simple. If it's a newspaper reporter in a newspaper article telling us that something happened, or the FBI, I'm sorry, but I'm going to believe the news reporter because they're generally dumber than the FBI and not as malicious. All right, so in North Dakota, Stanley, North Dakota, William Henry Timmer and his mother, Alma Cole, both provided statements to the FBI attesting to the fact that they knew Lee Harvey Oswald in North Dakota in 1953. They gave pretty in-depth statements about talking about communism and all this stuff. Oswald said he was in gangs in New York, which is hilarious. All right, New Orleans, January 1954. I have to emphasize that this epoch, this time period for Oswald, really should include September 53 onward, because as you'll see, while Lee Oswald is in New York during the fall semester of 1953, he's also simultaneously attending Beauregard Junior High School. So all of this will revolve around the return to New Orleans and a handful of addresses, okay? So to clarify where we're at, Lillian Moret and her family live at 757 French. The two addresses that the Oswalds are alleged to have lived at are 126 Exchange Place and then 1454 and 1452 St. Mary. Now, the 1454 and 1452 St. Mary are owned by Myrtle Evans and her husband Julian, and they will provide a very definitive timeline on when Marguerite and Lee lived there. However, this is in direct contradiction to all the other evidence. So, are they wrong? No, they're absolutely correct. There's two Oswalds. This is how it's explained. This is the only explanation. And besides the photographic evidence, this is a continued pattern that we started to see in 1945, almost 10 years before this incident here, or the series of incidents, I should say. So according to Robert Oswald, Marguerite and Lee left New York in January 54 and moved directly into 126 Exchange Place. And they remained there until they moved back to Fort Worth in late 55 or early 1956. Robert Oswald is such a dummy. He contradicts himself so many times. You need to read his Warren Commission testimony. Once you read Robert Oswald's and Lillian Moret's testimony, you realize that they were trying to have these stories go together, right? But they screwed up. they got so much wrong. And then Lillian Moret will eventually just give up and tell Jenner, yeah, whatever you got on your paper is right. So really it's a comedy of errors. So Oswald's record from Beauregard show a near perfect attendance record during the 1953 to 1954 school year. Okay, so what is the possible explanation for this perfect attendance record without any kind of conspiratorial leaning, right? Is it possible to interpret this record in a way that makes sense? Possibly. I'd say possibly, but then I'll point out a problem here. Possibly because there's constant discussion in the FBI reports and in requests for the school records of the individual records and the cumulative records, okay? The cumulative records are what they talk about mostly when they talk about Oswald's school records. And the problem with the cumulative records is it doesn't differentiate where certain classes were taken, right? So if you have a cumulative school record, it'll say you were in school in September 53, but it might not indicate whether it was New York or the school that you're currently at, right? Which would have been Beauregard for him. So that's the problem with the cumulative records. But nonetheless, the cumulative records indicate that Oswald had a good attendance record at Beauregard in 53, 54, which totally contradicts the notion that he could have been at PS 44 in Manhattan. So the 1953-54 records from Beauregard overlap with Oswald's near-perfect attendance records from PS 44 in New York at the same time. The overlap is from September 1953 to January 1954. Okay. So on the left here, we have the report from Beauregard. It says, under a general attendance grouping, the following attendance for this student at Beauregard was noted. Okay. This is an FBI report indicating that the report from Beauregard said this. 1953, 1954, report 1, September 53. Absent, tardy, and re-add. Okay, re-add means readmitted. Now, it's never clarified what readmitted means because you can't be readmitted for 2 entire school years in a row. You're readmitted if you were to come into a school year halfway. You're readmitted. But here, he's readmitted on every single report from 53 to 55. So that doesn't really make any sense unto itself. But it indicates in the FBI report that this is from Beauregard, and it says absent once, tardy 0, and readmitted 89. Okay, so readmitted obviously means present. Report 2 is the second semester, right? So it's 1953-54, second semester, absent 4 days, reattended 90. Oswald has the same cumulative positive record from Beauregard, from PS44 in Manhattan at the exact same time. See, that's the problem here. Now, some people dispute whether or not this actually indicates that Oswald was in New Orleans during September to January. But here's the problem with this time period. I have zero indicators that Marguerite and Lee were living anywhere in New Orleans that time. The only place it could have ever possibly been was at Lillian Moret's, but she's a liar and she covers this for this scheme over the years. And so you can't listen to a goddamn word that she says, except for the things that she screws up and tells you that she shouldn't be telling you, right? So it's hard to say. It's hard to say. If you have to, if I were to, if I were to say, if I were to make a guess, I would say yes, absolutely, that Oswald was there in 53 in September in New Orleans. But I can't prove that. I can't prove that. All we have is this limited information on the FBI report, which could come from the cumulative record, which would not possibly even be indicating Beauregard. And FBI agents are stupid. They make mistakes all the time. And so when it says this student at Beauregard was noted, he might not know what he's talking about, right? So there's a dozen different ways that you can interpret this report. That's my point. All right. So there is controversy over whether or not Oswald and his mother went directly from New York to New Orleans, or if they went to Fort Worth first. And I'm telling you with certainty, they went to Fort Worth first. I have no evidence of where they lived or what they did or anything like that, but they had no other support structures anywhere other than staying in New York, which we're told they didn't do. And there's, enough information to indicate that they left New York to get Lee out of trouble, right? Whether it was in August or January, doesn't matter. So it says here, Mr. Jenner asks, where was your sister living at the time, in Fort Worth? And Miss Moret says, I think so, yes. On the occasion that she came from New York and stopped off in New Orleans, did she stay with you for a few days? Well, she stayed with me until she found an apartment. Okay, so that statement, as she says there, she stayed with me until she found an apartment. She contradicts herself numerous times within very few pages in the Warren Commission reports. Okay. So basically, I believe that Marguerite and Lee went to Fort Worth for a couple months because we have a gap. We can say with certainty that Oswald is enrolled at Beauregard School starting in January of 1954, but we do not have any sign that Lee and his mother were staying anywhere in particular in New Orleans until May, which is really messed up. So according to Myrtle Evans, Marguerite spent time in either San Antonio or Fort Worth before moving back to New Orleans in the April of 1954. So here we're in April of 54. There are no records of Marguerite Oswald in Texas between January and April of 54. However, Harvey Oswald was attending Beauregard Junior High School during this time. All right. This is extremely problematic because we have a complete void of where these people were. And then you have in the testimony of Lillian Moret, she will testify that when she's asked by Mr. Jenner, and then she testifies that Marguerite and Lee came from New York and moved into 126 Exchange Place. And then when Jenner says, well, what about 1454 St. Mary? She goes, oh yeah, that was before 126 Exchange Place, right? So she's constantly squirming with her answers as she's testifying because she doesn't know what she's supposed to be saying, right? These people didn't coordinate their stories well enough, not nearly well enough. But what we can say for certain is that Marguerite and Lee don't show up in New Orleans till May of 1954. And the only reason we speculate April of 54 is because if she stayed with Lillian for a couple weeks, that would put it into April. So, but we have the statements of, where is it? We have the statements of, here we go. Julian Evans stated that Lee Harvey Oswald and his mother lived at 1454 and 1452 St. Mary's, New Orleans from May 54 through May of 55. This is as problematic as it could ever be. This is more evidence of Oswald being in two places at once. And I believe it must have caused an issue somewhere because as you'll see within, by the time summer ends, you will see that Harvey Oswald will move from 126 Exchange Place where he was attending Beauregard, where he knew Ed Vabell and he knew Myra DeRoos. Myra DeRoos was she was a teacher at Beauregard Junior High School. And she gives a very detailed story about Ed Vobel and a piano falling on Oswald. And she makes very clear that Oswald didn't want to be called Lee and that he insisted he be called Harvey. So she refers to him as Harvey throughout this interview. I was going to play it in this presentation, but it would have added a significant amount of time. So it'll be in the edited version of this when this is done. But Myra DeRoos clearly indicates the boy she knew was Harvey, who was friends with Ed Vobel at Beauregard. And this was during the September 1953 school year, because it was the beginning of her second year there, is exactly what she says, right? So make of it what you will. Oswald, two places at once again. So the 1454 St. Mary, this is problematic because obviously if they don't show up in New Orleans until May, then how the hell do we have Oswald going to school at Beauregard? That's the fundamental problem. So here we have this overlap. And this causes Harvey Oswald and his mother to leave 126 Exchange Place, and they will be replaced there by Lee and his mother after they move out of St. Mary's. So they do a swaparoo at this address, just like they did at the San Saba address, where we have witnesses who saw Marguerite and her son Lee there for about a year or a little longer. And then we have the evidence that the whole family was only there for 2 months because they came in on the back end of that, just like they did here at 126 Exchange Place. That's exactly what happened. And one thing I want to point out is that if you're paying attention, all of these anomalies on an individual basis are just seeming anomalies. But when you put them in the proper chronology and spread it out over time and look at it, it becomes pretty apparent that there is a deception here going on. And the deception appears to indicate that Oswald would be in two places at one time, right? So, yeah, Myrtle Evans and Julian Evans, they're pretty reliable witnesses. The only problem I have with some of her testimony is that she has an address. She lives on this street called Britannia. And when Chenner is talking to Lillian Moret, he mentions that Marguerite might have lived at 1910 Britannia, which that could be the gap filler I'm looking for. That could be the time that she could have gone right to New Orleans in January 54 and gone to 1910 Britannia. But there's no evidence, there's no indication of that. And the only reason we even know that address is because Mr. Jenner, the lawyer for the Warren Commission, mentioned it while questioning Lillian Moret. How does he know that address if nobody else in the world ever heard of it, except Lillian Moret, who seemed to acknowledge she was aware of it, right? So these fucking people, man, that's probably where she was, but I can't prove that. And that would contradict the idea that she was in San Antonio or in Fort Worth prior to coming to New Orleans in May, right? So you have, there's only a couple possibilities here, right? Only a couple. All right. So here we have a letter, and this letter, oh my God, this letter is problematic for a dozen reasons, but what we're going to focus on is we're going to focus on timing. Marguerite's letter indicates they had recently arrived back in New Orleans after the ordeal in New York, and the letter is dated May 10th, right? What does that indicate? It indicates they just showed up in New Orleans in May, right? That would contradict everything that I had said about being at Lillian Moret's in April and the weeks leading up to that, right? Because if they just showed up and took a couple days to... There's one thing about Marguerite. She was really big on writing letters. She did it a lot. I mean, there's a ton of letters that we don't have that are referenced that we don't have. Like, when Trump going to give us those letters? Oh, fuck you. We're not getting nothing, motherfuckers. All right. So, dear John, we're back in New Orleans and happy to be back. Like, they're just back. And this is May 10th, right? So they couldn't have been there, right? As per her own sentiment to her son. It's not the words it's not her words that tell you the answer. It's her sentiment. You've got to see past the words and see how she's feeling. And that's how you know that this statement is probably goddamn true. All right. Second letter from Marguerite Oswald sent to John Pick after leaving New York in January was postmarked June 14th, 54, and had a return address of 1454 St. Mary, New Orleans. Remember, what are the dates we're looking at? At 1454, we're looking at May to May, 54 to 55. All right. So she's supposed to be living at St. Mary address that whole year. Lee Harvey Oswald will attend Beauregard Junior High School in the fall of 1954-55. These are the records from that time. And this is when he's photographed with his tooth knocked out. Hence, this is the real Lee Harvey Oswald. at Beauregard in the 1954-55 school year. The statements of Myra DeRoos and Edva Bell clearly indicate that it was Harvey Oswald, that he identified himself by name as Harvey Oswald. That was a year before this. Yep. Okay. This is where we're talking some major obfuscation, and I don't understand this in the least bit. I can't explain this at all. Even though Marguerite Oswald and Lee Harvey Oswald were confirmed by Myrtle and Julian Evans as having lived at the St. Mary address until the end of May 1955. We have a letter to John Pick dated and postmarked October 14th, 1954, with a return address of 126 Exchange Place. Do you see the problem now? Because from May 54 to May 55, Marguerite and her son Lee are living at St. Mary's. Lee is a asshole. He's rude to everybody and rude to his mother. And Myrtle Evans can hear him yelling through the walls and stuff, right? But yet, we'll talk to one of Oswald's neighbors at Exchange Place who said he was the most polite boy she ever knew. This letter is such an anomaly. It's unbelievable. So here, I'm going to point something else out. We saw the letter earlier that was written in November of 54, okay? November 54. And it talked about Oswald having his birthday on October the 19th, right? Well, look here. Now here in this letter, which is before that happens, before that incident, it says Lee will be 15 next Monday the 18th. You see that? This letter was written a month before that other letter. Lee will be 15 next Monday the 18th. But in the letter we looked at earlier, it said Lee just had his 15th birthday on the 19th, on October 19th. Do you remember? Right? What is going on here? What is going on here? When I read this, you know what it reeks of? This reeks of the letters from Oswald to V.T. Lee that were sent regarding the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. You know why? Because those are fakes. Because those letters, which were sent on August the 1st, postmarked August the 1st, they talk about the fight between Oswald and Brunier out on the street corner. But that incident didn't happen till the 9th, right? Those letters are forgeries. They had bad information in them. They had information that contradicted known history. Just like this letter. This reeks of a forgery. I can't say that with certainty. The handwriting looks pretty good. I've read enough of these damn things to know these people's handwriting inside and out. This handwriting looks okay. Although this handwriting could be Lillian Moret's too. It could be Lillian's. But here we have a reference to Lee will be 15 next Monday the 18th. And then the next letter sent a month later says Lee had his birthday on the 19th. What the fuck is happening here? Yeah, Myrtle Evans said Lee was rude and arrogant and disrespected his mother. And one thing I thought was great is that all these people like Clem Tshirt and Myrtle Evans and all these people who knew the real Marguerite, when they see the fake Marguerite, a false Marguerite on television later, all of them were like, oh my God, who the hell is that? That can't be Marguerite. She's so old and ugly. Like this statement here. Mrs. Evans says, a very good housekeeper, very tasty. She could take anything and make something out of it and something beautiful. She had a lot of natural talent that way, and she was not lazy. She would work with things by the hour for her children, and she kept a very neat house, and she was always so lovely herself. That's why when I saw her on TV after all this happened, she looked so old and haggard, and I said, that couldn't be Margie. But of course it was, but if you had known Margie before all this happened, you'd see what I mean. She was beautiful. She had beautiful wavy hair. Because it's not Marguerite Oswald. It's a false imposter, okay? Jesus Christ. So 126 Exchange Place was owned by a company called Loving Enterprises, Inc., and their offices were located at 321 St. Charles on the 10th floor. Now, when you dig into this, this is really interesting. I don't know where it goes, and I hope somebody else will pick up the torch and carry this because I don't want to dig into this because I got other things to do. This leads to a family of the Colemans, Dorothy Coleman and her husband. I forget what his name. I thought it was Richard, but I'm not really sure offhand. But the Colemans are the occupants of this 10th floor for many, many years and with various businesses. And also on the 10th floor is something called the Honorary Croatian Embassy. It was the Honorary Croatian Embassy the entire time from the time that Oswald lived there throughout the assassination over a decade later. What does this mean? This just sounds like some more CIA, USAID fucking cover bullshit nonsense, doesn't it? Right? So here we seem to have some kind of connection between some shady sounding honorary Croatian embassy on the 10th floor of the 321 St. Charles building, who happens to be the same floor of the building of the people who own 126 Exchange Place. You see where I'm going with this? Like, it's just weird. All right, so the rental, and I'm just throwing this out there for other researchers to take off with because I don't want to do it. Rental of 126 Exchange Place was handled by a Mr. M. Arnold Lehman, who worked for the Loving Enterprises company. All right, so this is where you can tell Robert Oswald is full of shit. Robert Oswald testified that he got out of the Marines in July of 1955 and within a few days bought a car and made the drive from Fort Worth to New Orleans for a 1-week visit. We have a lot of contradictory information here on Robert Oswald and his alleged visits to New Orleans. And I can't help but feel as though his timing on when he really came to New Orleans would have to coincide with Oswald's or Harvey Oswald's subsequent appearance at Stripling Junior High School in Fort Worth. So what happens is you have Harvey Oswald in New Orleans. He's attending Beauregard Junior High School. You have Lee Oswald shows up in May, probably initially at the Britannia address, and then moves into 1454 and 1452 St. Mary before going to 126 Exchange Place, where Harvey Oswald and his mother were already living. At that point is when they made the swaparoo, and Harvey Oswald and his mother made their way to Fort Worth, where they would go live at 2220 Thomas Place. This will be the first of 3 times that the false Marguerite Oswald lives at 2220 Thomas Place. Okay. She was living there at the time of the assassination itself, which is really weird. And this is also connected to the Birchwood address that Marguerite Oswald allegedly owned that nobody ever knew about. She never lived at, never got a rent check from, that she owned for a couple years. That address was also basically on the same block or a block away from Stripling Junior High School, right up the road from 2220 Thomas Place. I mean, when you look at where they were on a map, it was like, wow, they were just a couple houses apart from each other. So Robert Oswald testifies he gets out of the Marines in 55. This is contradicted later in his statements. I don't know if I have it on this one or in a later document, but he will indicate that he made a mistake. Oh, no, I forgot. I came and visited them in January of 54, and that Lee was in the Civil Air Patrol and all this stuff, but that was not a possibility because Lee wasn't in the Civil Air Patrol in 54. So the entire thing that Robert Oswald just like sticks his foot in his fucking mouth the entire time he's testifying to the Warren Commission. All right, so Mildred Sawyer was a neighbor of the Oswalds at 126 Exchange Place, and she described Oswald as a polite little boy who was well-mannered, as opposed to Myrtle Evans' description of Oswald, who said he was intolerable and rude to guests. So clearly we're dealing with 2 different personalities. And so over time, you get to see, like Jim Garrison pointed out in the memo about the Marines, that one of them was taller and he had gray eyes. The other one was shorter with blue eyes, right? As you go through these documents, you get to understand that these were 2 boys with 2 different personalities. And Mildred Sawyer here makes it very clear that the boy that she dealt with was Harvey Oswald, who was a much nicer guy than the really Harvey Oswald, who was a dick. And he was probably a dick because he was withdrawn and he didn't have friends and he didn't get along and didn't do well in school, all because he had the mastoidectomy and he was partially deaf and withdrawn. You're starting to understand who the really Harvey Oswald is and why he was who he was, right? It's not even close to what we're told by anybody. These are the factors you have to consider when looking at the life of Oswald. This is who he was. He was an angry, pissed off young man because he couldn't barely hear in his left ear and he didn't have any goddamn friends and he couldn't ever meld with anybody. And that's why he was fucking angry, right? And this motherfucker never, ever talked to anything about communism at all, ever. It took me a long time to really be able to discern these individual personality types of these 2 people. And I've absolutely concluded they're brothers. They're most certainly brothers. It's undeniable. Probably, maybe even fraternal twins separated at birth, possibly born a year apart because she fucked Harvey Oswald, right? And had Harvey. That's a good possibility. I think it's a damn good possibility that one of them is a year younger and is the actual son of Harvey Francis Oswald and Marguerite. That makes a lot of fucking sense. Hey, we'll never know because the documents attached to this stuff, which they definitely have, we're never going to see, right? Hey, I've been fucking swinging on Trump's nuts just like everybody else the past couple weeks with all the killer shit he's been doing. But fuck, you think we're getting this shit? You're kidding yourself. All right, so Marguerite and Lee Harvey Oswald left New Orleans directly from the 126 Exchange Place address, indicating they lived there till the end of June of 1956. Okay. Why is this important? Because it indicates that they were in goddamn 126 Exchange Place for 3 years straight, while for a 1-year overlap, you have Lee and his mother living at St. Mary's. And once they realized that there's a problem, it must have been called out. It must have shown up on it must have shown up on some kind of like credit report. Somehow they must have become aware there was a conflict and it was brought to their attention and they said, fuck. And that's why Harvey and his mother dipped out of town to go to Stripling, which I think I have some slides coming up on that here pretty soon. So when you go over the residents of 126 Exchange Place in the New Orleans directory, as per John Armstrong, these are the names that you get. And the name that jumps out to me is Jack Schultz. And the problem with Jack Schultz is also a name of a neighbor of the Oswalds at Victor Street. But Jack Schultz in this case is like a fucking 6-year-old kid. Like, no kidding. Like, this Jack Schultz is like 6 years old. So why the fuck is like a 6-year-old kid's name in the goddamn phone directory? I don't know. I don't have a clue. But it's probably two different Jack Schultz, but Jack Schultz sounds like Jack Martin to me. A CIA code name. Who the fuck knows? You know, you can just chalk it off to me being paranoid. But anyway, John Armstrong dug into all of these people, and yeah, none of this makes any sense at all. So the Warren Commission determined that Marguerite Oswald and Lee Oswald lived at 126 Exchange Place beginning March 16th of 1955. But here's the problem. Myra DeRoos, and I do have to go and double check this because it's slipping my mind at the moment. But Myra DeRoos indicated she was back at Beauregard. It was her second year. The way she talked indicated to me that it was fresh back. Back meaning like after summer, right? I'm back at my second year. And that is when she talks about Harvey Oswald and the boy who introduced himself as Harvey. His name was Lee Harvey Oswald, but he wanted to be called Harvey. Okay. And she talks about the piano incident with Ed Vobel, right? That is September of 1953. She drove Oswald home after the piano incident to 126 Exchange Place, and she was like disgusted that he could live there because they had like bars and hookers and stuff downstairs. They literally lived above a pool hall that was like a nasty cesspool. So that indicates that Oswald was living in 126 Exchange Place going back to September of 53. But the official story says not until March 16th of 55, right? This is a problem, and I think this led to them having to get Harvey out of town. All right, so Oswald's Social Security application has 126 Exchange Place address on it, and it's dated February 6th, 55, so that's before, that is before we're told that they had moved in there. All right, so this is another thing that really needs to be dug into, and this will be sorted out by the time it makes it into my book. Both Marguerite Oswald and Lee Harvey Oswald worked for the Dolly Shoe Company, and this was during the first quarter of 1955, and they were residing at 126 Exchange Place. So the first quarter is January through March, right? So even the story of them moving in March is false. According to the records at Beauregard Junior High, Oswald registered on January 1st, 54, and stayed through the 55-56 school year. His completion at Beauregard is well documented. His mother is listed as Margaret, not Marguerite. The address was listed 126 Exchange Place. This is Harvey and the false Marguerite. This is Oswald's Beauregard Junior High diploma. So Oswald's school record showed he attended Warren Easton High School in New Orleans until October 10th, 1956. Now, this is funny because everybody has moved over to Texas now. Everybody is out of New Orleans. He's graduated from Beauregard and moved on to Warren Easton, which he will not attend for very long, or will he? We really don't know. And the reason we don't know is because when the records were sent over to the new school, which would have been Arlington, it indicated that he had not left Warren Easton until October 10th, 56. Right. But we're told allegedly that the records were requested and received in September of 1956, which both things can't be true. They could not have received documents saying he was there till October 10th, 56, if it was September 56. So What does that indicate? What I think it indicates is that Lee Oswald was in New Orleans. The real Lee Oswald was in New Orleans going to Warren Easton until October 10th, 1956, when he ended up dropping out, because this will coincide with the time he joins the Marines, like 2 weeks later exactly. Okay. So you have one Oswald, the real Lee Oswald, still in New Orleans attending Warren Easton Junior High School till October 10th, 56. And you have Harvey Oswald over in Arlington, where he'll attend for 1 month before dropping out. And then he joins from, I think it was San Diego, he joined. He goes into Fort Worth and they send him to San Diego, and that's where it goes from there. But we're moving into the Marine stuff. And if you think this is dry as fuck, you'll be happy to know the Marine stuff is equally as dry, yet a little bit more exciting. But you'll see the patterns that are forming here now, the duplicate addresses, the duplicates, the overlapping school records. This is a persistent theme from 1945 onward, and it doesn't end when Oswald joins the Marines. Okay. Which is coming up very soon. But here you see Oswald allegedly entered September 5th, 56 at Arlington, but we just saw the document here that he didn't leave Warren Easton until October 10th, right? And so those two things are reality. And the obfuscation in the middle, which is mostly pushed by the FBI and the JFK research community, who are too stupid to figure this out. October 10th was when he was actually there till, okay? And the story is what's malleable, right? Not the data. We have hard data. You're looking at a date of October 10th, 56. That's what a human being wrote on a piece of paper from looking at the records, right? Okay, so, and then we have the other record showing September 5th, 1956 in Arlington. These are concrete data points that are immutable, okay? So what part is mutable? Because that contradicts this. It's the story in the middle, right? See, this is the bait and switch. This is the look to the left while we fuck you to the right. And the JFK research community is largely responsible for doing that because they don't understand it, because they're dumb. So that's Oswald's overlap from Warren Easton to Arlington Heights. All right, so now we're going to get back into residences, more shenanigans with residences. Mr. and Mrs. James Taylor. There's a landlords at 4936 Collinwood. So what you have is Harvey Oswald and Lee Oswald are already back in Fort Worth. And you will have Harvey Oswald, his mother, and Robert Oswald move into this 4936 Collinwood. Now, there is some reporting on the fact that Collinwood, and you see how it says Collingwood here, that was actually done on purpose in the FBI just to check for moles or something. I don't give two fucks about any of those stories, okay? People get distracted in the weeds, okay? Doesn't matter if Oswald was, and his paperwork was used as another deception for administrative purposes. That doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. It's par for the course once you understand this, right? So, but these addresses here, we have some more contradiction here, and really not contradiction of the address of 4936 Collinwood, but it's where Marguerite Oswald goes from there that we run into problems. So this is the first time that we really have an indication that Robert Oswald is in on the scheme, because he's living with Marguerite and Harvey at this address. And where is Lee Oswald and his mother at this time? Well, I think that is unknown. We have some contradiction there too. So this document from the FBI shows the alleged dates of residences. The Collinwood address is July 25th, 56 to May 28th, 57. The FBI does not acknowledge any other addresses occupied by Marguerite during this time period. So other addresses at this time period, I believe the problem is 3830 West 6th. And that 3830 West 6th is an address that becomes documented when Oswald sends a postcard from Hawaii while he's in the Marines, which I'll get to in a little bit. But the statements of Mrs. Taylor contradict the idea of where she was living, which was 3830 West 6th. So Oswald's Marine application had the 4936 Collinwood address. The landlord, Mrs. James Taylor, repeatedly visited Marguerite Oswald Imposter at 1031 West 5th in Fort Worth. After she moved out, she owed her like $60 for bills. And so Mrs. Taylor went repeatedly to the 1031 West 5th address to get this money, and she wouldn't give her the money. And that's what she told the FBI. But that address is not acknowledged by anybody until years later. And this is another example of what I believe is this kind of real estate network, right? Because the Marguerite Oswald Imposter will go stay at 1031 West 5th, but then That's not acknowledged by anybody except for Mrs. Taylor. But then, like 5 years later, it's an official address of hers. You see what I'm saying? Just like the 2220 Thomas Place, and just like the San Saba address, and just like these other addresses that are allegedly owned or lived at by Marguerite Oswald, there's fucking weird shit going on, right? There's enough going on to know that she can't be the owner of these places, and the people who are owners are just fronts, because you don't ever, no one ever moves out of a place and then moves back into it 10 years later, but with a different landlord. It doesn't happen ever. Okay. Maybe we'll have an answer to that coming up here soon. But this is where we have major problems between these addresses, 1031 and 3830 West 6th. As you'll see, this is the only documentation of that address, and this is from 62, not 57. Marguerite Oswald, 1013 Fifth Avenue, apartment 6. Right? That is ignored, that she was ever there around that 56, 57 time period. That starts to show the pattern, just like Thomas Place and the other places, like I already talked about, right? So address 1, 4936 Collinwood, July 1st, 56 to June 1st, 57, as per landlord Mrs. James Taylor. That's well documented by the Warren Commission. Address 2, 1031 West 5th, provided to the FBI by Mrs. James Taylor, the landlord at 4936 Collinwood. This address provided to Miss Taylor by Mrs. Oswald, subsequently engaged Mrs. Oswald at this address attempting to collect a debt. So she lived at that address from June 1st, 57 till who knows when. And then address 3 is 3830 West 6th Street, where L.M. McCracken stated he saw Oswald visit his mother here for 2 weeks, multiple times while he was on leave in 1957. So you can't be living at two places at once, which is apparently what was happening at 1031 West 5th and 3830 West 6th Street, right? So, yeah, more, it's par for the course at this point, right? Just like when I talk about in A Warning from History, when I talk about how after a while you start to see these Oswald impersonations, and it's like, oh yeah, duh. It's obvious who it is because we've seen this pattern before. And what are we seeing now? We're seeing this pattern again and again and again with these overlapping addresses, right? Even if there's not two Oswalds in reality, but there is. But let's just say, for hypothetically, let's say there was not two Oswalds and this was just a body double swapping operation with different people. It's still a body swapping operation with different people. All right? That's the fucking problem here. This reeks of intelligence. And going back, when you connect that to her engagement with the Navy, going back to 1941, possibly even earlier than that, the Waves program, her telephone operator status, and the fact that her whole life has been obfuscated, it's fucking clear what's going on. This is an old, dead Cold War experiment to get a spy in the fucking Soviet Union. Plain and simple. It's not even that hard of a fucking concept to wrap your head around. This is tradecraft. Maybe not at its finest, but it's tradecraft nonetheless. So this check from Robert Oswald to Lee Oswald was written on the 8th of October, 1956, a time when Robert briefly stayed with Marguerite Oswald in Pasteur. He left to get married in November of 56, and there's something shady up with his wife. All these people's wives, like, he goes out for like 2 months and gets a wife. Jesus Christ, I don't think so. I don't think it works that way. Maybe it did back then because everyone wanted to get married. But yeah, there's some shenanigans up with his wife, 100%. She's not who she says to be. On her grave, she's dead, but there isn't even like a death date on it. It's really weird. Then let me see. Okay, here's where it gets interesting. So we're going to back up a little bit because Robert Oswald is actually he gets out in 55, like we talked about. We can confirm he got out of the Marines in 55. In 1953, he's stationed at Opelika. Opelika is near Miami. It's the station near Miami no one ever talks about. Opelika is where they basically ran the operation to oust Arbenz in Guatemala. It is also the station that they used to run Operation Mockingbird out of. And at the exact same time they were doing that, Jerry Hemming lived like right up the road in Opelika. Okay. So Opelika is an extremely important part of the puzzle that no one ever talks about, that is directly connected to all the guys down in No Name Key, Jerry Hemming, which brings us to Lawrence Howard, William Seymour, and the guys who pulled the trigger. Okay. So we have our first kind of cross of, we kind of have this cross here of Opelika and the history behind Opelika and the assassination story and Oswald's life via Robert Oswald. Okay. One thing I want to point out here, he says here, in July, I completed my course at the Aviation Metalsmith School in Millington, Tennessee. That's Memphis. So later, when you hear me talk about Oswald and the allegations that he was at Memphis, right here, you have evidence that there was another Oswald at Memphis. And as we'll see years prior, but still, um, you'll see that as Oswald went through all of his schools that he went through in the Marines, he was not even close to being the only Oswald who was enrolled at the time, which I believe is actually part of the deception. So Opelika was a secret CIA base. Let me see if there's anything worth reading in here. It was there that several senior CIA officers labored for months organizing intricate logistical details of PB Success, the code name for the anti-Arbenz operation. Among the officers who worked at Building 67 was E. Howard Hunt, who later went on to help engineer the 1972 Watergate burglary as one of the White House plumbers. So, yeah, Building 67 was the CIA headquarters at Opelika that Robert Oswald was stationed at in 1953 at the peak of this Oswald deception going on in New York. There has to be a connection there. The 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing. So what I realized was that Robert Oswald was stationed with the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing in 53. Lee Harvey Oswald was stationed with them in 58. And then it was the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing that moved from Opelika to El Toro in 55, which is kind of funny because that means that basically the CIA was running the operations that Lee Harvey Oswald was stationed at in the 3rd Aircraft Wing. There's no way the 3rd Aircraft Wing was not connected to intelligence. It just makes perfect sense. So Marguerite Oswald worked for Clyde Campbell's department store in Fort Worth while living at 3830 West 6th. All right. So this I pulled up at Oswald's leave from the Marines to see if I could verify or corroborate the dates that he would have visited his mother at 3830 West 6th. Oswald documented leaves were between February 27th, 57 and 13 March 57 and June 20, 57 and July 4th, 57, right? So that's a way that we can place Marguerite Oswald as having been living at these addresses at this time. Here we go. More references to 3830 West 6th in April of 57. And we had the postcard, which wasn't sent till the end of August, right? So we have her going back to that address all the way in April of 57. Okay, here's where things get really strange. And I talked about, I believe that this is a covert real estate network run by intelligence. And I think this just adds credence to that. Marguerite Oswald used the Collinwood address on a change of address form for Lee in 1945. Okay. She didn't live at that address until 1955. This is inexplicable. This is either a large-scale covert network of real estate that is being used to shuffle people around in various intelligence operations, or all these documents are fakes. And if all these documents are fakes, then the joke is on me. But then you have to explain why all the documents are fakes. And then we're back to square one with the entire assassination, aren't we? All right. Lee's moved to Fort Worth from New Orleans, and the 126 Exchange Place address is documented as having been on July 1st, 1956. Note, Oswald put the wrong name for his mother. His mother's never been Margaret. It's Marguerite. Also, remember, he put Margaret Oswald, who was living in New Orleans under the name Margaret Oswald in the directory. Margaret Keating, right? Who, in the 1955-56 directory, went by Margaret Oswald. Fucking weird, huh? I've been going crazy for like the last, I don't know how long I've been doing this part. I don't know. I'm starting to fucking lose my mind. And I hope you all understand why at this point. So here we have the dates. I just overlaid the dates here. I'm not going to beat a dead horse on this issue. I think I beat it to death already. So John Armstrong got another thing wrong. He has her listed here. The work records say that she was working at Gold Rings till July 31st, 56. But I think I debunked that. I don't even remember. I'm starting to slip. My voice is going. It's going to be the next rough couple hours. Yeah, this is wrong. I debunked this. And do I have the document here? I don't think I have the document here, but I did debunk the idea that it was till July 31st, 56. I was able to place them by July 1st in Fort Worth. So. All right. Harvey Oswald, Fort Worth, September 1954 at Stripling Junior High School. Like I said, they did a swap-a-roo between Harvey Oswald is at Beauregard. Something goes on at Beauregard. They have to shuffle him out of there. They shuffle him out of there. He goes by Harvey. He doesn't go by Lee. He goes by Harvey Oswald. Then Lee Oswald shows up, and who's the person in common there? Edva Bell. I have the interview with Edva Bell, which will be stitched into this presentation right now, and it will show that he tells interviewers that he didn't meet Lee Oswald until this 54-55 school year when Oswald got in the fight and had his tooth knocked out. But clearly, we will have the testimony of Myra DeRoos, who says that the piano fell on Harvey and Edva Bell is the one who helped him. So Edva Bell is somehow connected to both of them. Edva Bell will eventually be poisoned to death. At least that's what his father thinks. Franchetta Schubert was an 8th grader when Lee Harvey Oswald was in 9th grade attending Stripling Junior High School. Frank Coodlady was the assistant principal. Coodlady provided Lee Harvey Oswald's records to the FBI on November 23rd, 1963. The FBI denies this happened. Oswald's records indicate he completed 6 weeks of school before dropping out. Lee Oswald will finish 9th grade in New Orleans. So we have, video. John Armstrong got video of these two people talking about when Oswald went to Stripling. So we also have, here's another thing. Robert Oswald will testify that Lee Harvey Oswald went to Stripling, but he is wrong in the context that he's talking. He's talking about when he gets out of Ridge Leah and that he goes from Ridge Leah right to Stripling. That would have been fall of 1952 when Oswald goes to live with John Pick, right? So that could kind of fill in one of the gaps there. However, I don't believe that's correct at all. I think the documentation and the timing on when Oswald goes to New York to go to the Trinity Lutheran School pretty much coincides with everything that makes sense. So Robert even stating that he went to Stripling is just wrong. And Robert wasn't there anyway. Robert was in the fucking Marines, so he wouldn't know unless he was told he was at Stripling. But the reality is it could not have been, because the timing of when he would have been at Stripling, when Robert would have said in that year, particularly, he was most certainly up at the Trinity School in the Bronx. There you go. So let me continue on. Oswald's records from 54-55 overlap is that's a problem, right? That's what this one says. And all right. Let's slow down again. I'm gonna read this, and you'll kind of start to see how this deception is connected to large-scale government operations. Okay. In addition to some of the information which he's given us in the past, Cooper said that Marguerite told him that she called Clem Tshirt after the assassination and asked him to help her son. Tshirt informed Marguerite that he no longer practiced law. She said she'd known Tshirt and Vic Shiro when she was living in New Orleans. Marguerite told Cooper that she's very suspicious of Fred Korth and told him that Lee's discharge from the Marine Corps was handled by Fred Korth. That's a big deal. Cooper said he found out that the house Marguerite was living in at the time of the assassination, which is 2220 Thomas Place, across from Stripling Junior High, where Oswald was witnessed during that 1954-1955 school year, and where Marguerite Oswald was living at the time of the assassination, it belonged to a close friend of Fred Korth, a Mary McCarthy, Mrs. Mary McCarthy Jr. Cooper said Marguerite also told him that Fred Korth played a part in Lee's life, but did not explain any further. Okay. This is so fucking huge. I can't pound this into your fucking head enough. Fred Korth, primary mover in the dual Oswald scheme. Not only that, let me see, where's my next good slide? Fred Korth was Edwin Ekdahl's lawyer when he got divorced from Marguerite Oswald in 1948. So Fred Korth, who was Secretary of the goddamn Navy, who was head of the Army, who worked most of his life as a liaison between these government agencies and Congress, basically, he was the lawyer for Marguerite Oswald's husband, who was most certainly connected to intelligence through Ebasco and their contracts with the Soviet Union, right? These people, this all revolves around naval intelligence. I hope that you can see the overarching theme here in the background that has seemingly escaped everyone. Fred Korth was Ekdahl's lawyer, and the implication of that is he knew Oswald. He knew everything about Oswald. He knew the family intimately. He's the one who got Oswald out of the Marines and got him discharged. He's the one who got him back from the Soviet Union. This guy's been in Oswald's life since he was a kid, just like I said. Just like the operation, this covert operation involving identity transfer went back to when Oswald was a kid. This is the strings that will connect us there. Now, do you think they're going to give us any documents related to this? I don't think so. Oswald joins the Marines October 24th, 1956. This is a 5'9" Lee on December 28th, 1956. That's the real Lee Harvey Oswald. The photograph on the right is Lee Harvey Oswald, date undetermined, 58, 59, like I've already talked about. Clearly the same guy with the big fat bull neck and everything. 5'11" Lee. Okay, with gray eyes, just like Garrison indicated in his report that the taller one had gray eyes and the shorter one had blue eyes. Arrest records and autopsy reports show 5'9" in height. Okay. Both of Oswald's arrests and his autopsy indicate he was 5'9" tall. This man has a cleft chin. You see that? This man does not. This is the real Lee Harvey Oswald. This is Oswald's application for the Standard Coffee Company in New Orleans. He indicated he was 5'9" tall. That's Harvey Oswald on the left. That's the real Lee Harvey Oswald on the right.